moving in my heart, I will pray. Upon the mountain, my Lord spoke, out of his mouth came fire and smoke. All around me looks so fine, ask my Lord if all was mine. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Jordan River is chilly and cold, it chills the body, not the soul. Ain't but one train on this track, runs to heaven and right back. Every time
Grace and peace to you from the one who was and is to come. Amen. Albert Camus once said, "Some people talk in their sleep. Lecturers talk while other people sleep." Well, if you happen to fall asleep during this presentation, I might have achieved more than I was bargaining for. A mother once encouraged her daughter to follow her dreams. She left and took a nap. The following reflections are a brief, rather eclectic foray through the history of sleep and are inspired by a recent talk by the theologian Stefan Lüttich. I invite you to take a seat among Simberg's crowd and observe yourself sleeping or trying to fall asleep. From the beginning, human interest in the phenomenon of sleep has had two dimensions. The first dimension comprises a scientific and philosophical examination. Just as breathing, eating, and drinking, sleeping belongs to our basic lifelong needs. Sleep re-energizes the body's cells, allows for waste to be cleared from the brain, and fosters learning and memory. It even helps to regulate our mood, appetite, and libido. Sleeping is an integral part of our life and incredibly complex. The brain generates two distinct types of sleep: slow wave sleep, known as deep sleep, and rapid eye movement, also called dreaming sleep. Most of the sleeping we do is of the slow wave sleep variety, characterized by large, slow brain waves, relaxed muscles, and slow, deep breathing, which may help the brain and body to recuperate after a long day. When we fall asleep, the brain does not merely go offline. Research has shown that a series of highly orchestrated events puts the brain to sleep in stages. Two groups of cells, one in the hypothalamus and the other in the brainstem, prompt the slow wave sleep. The switching on of those two cells triggers a loss of consciousness. After the slow wave sleep, the rapid eye movement begins, controlled by a small group of cells in the brainstem. This mode is bizarre. A dreamer's brain becomes highly active while the body's muscles are paralyzed and breathing and heart rate become erratic. The purpose of REM sleep remains a biological mystery, despite our growing understanding of its biochemistry and neurobiology. In order to maintain and shape our conscious lives, we need to regularly have a certain amount of time where we experience a degree of loss of control and consciousness. It is this paradox that has inspired analysis on the cause and nature of sleep. The second dimension concerns the deeper symbolic, moral, and religious meaning of sleep, which includes the experience of sleeplessness or insomnia. One could argue that the exploration of those two dimensions of sleep has been sustained by our desire both to understand ourselves better and to gain more control over the conscious aspects of our lives. One of the first thinkers of classical antiquity to reflect in a more systematic way on sleep was Aristotle. In the 4th century BCE, the Greek philosopher composed a small writing titled On Sleep and Sleeplessness. Sleep is seen to be a vital function, giving the body some rest from seeing and perceiving. Such rest is considered necessary for continued health of body and soul. But even though sleep is defined as an absence of perception, the existence of dreams reveals that one's perception is not completely suppressed. These dreams are said to be informed by the image received during waking hours. At the same time, our waking thoughts and actions can be the result of dream images. Aristotle argues that sleep is not just a sudden blackout, and therefore not just a mere unconsciousness, but rather reveals a special kind of ability to perceive, though our cognitive ability does seem paralyzed and shackled during sleep. Aristotle's insights were formative all the way to the modern era. It was only in the 20th century that, thanks to scientific and medical research, our understanding of sleep received new decisive impulses. This was the result of the development of new methods which allowed scientists to measure electrical nerve impulses of the brain. In the 1950s, the rapid eye movement sleep was discovered, a time period during our sleep which recurs several times throughout the night and is credited with giving our sleep a recreative and creative quality. Just as fascinating is the ongoing research into the rich and vast cultural and religious history of sleeping. Already in ancient Egypt, sleeping is regarded as a particular condition, a state of being in limbo, in a kind of intermediate world. The soul of the sleeping leaves the body in order to climb into the sun god's boat and take a nightly journey through the underworld. It allows the soul to recover from the hardships of the day. In the morning, when the sun god enters again the world of the living, the souls return to the bodies of the living, while the souls of the dead leave the mummies and escort the sun god. Such mythological ideas suggest a close symbolic connection between sleep and death, which can also be traced in other cultures. In Greek mythology, the god of sleep, Hypnos, and the god of death, Thanatos, are twin brothers of the night goddess Nyx. Since the gods of Mount Olympus are considered to be immortal and yet also do fall asleep, the god of sleep, Hypnos, is regarded as the more powerful of the twins. Given our existential need for sleep, we should not be surprised that the state of sleep also carries great significance in the Bible. Scanning the references to sleep, one will quickly notice that the biblical view of sleep is ambiguous, not unlike many other aspects of human existence. The Hebrew Bible and the New Testament associate sleep with positive and negative meanings and draw on ideas of neighboring cultures. The first sleep mentioned in our Bible is the deep sleep of Adam. In our second, probably older, biblical creation account, we read about Adam falling into a deep sleep so that God can complete his creation. One wonders if such deep sleep was only possible because Adam had not yet eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam's nap must have been a blissful sleep, the kind of blissful sleep of Cecil Collins' sleeping jester. Little did he know that he would wake up to the discovery that he's not alone in the world. You will have noticed that I skipped a few verses from the creation account, which I think don't need to be repeated. They are sadly so burdened with patriarchal machoism and have been so abused by misogynists that every effort to save them by going back to the original Hebrew seems an almost futile exegetical effort. But let me say so much here. When God realizes that it is not good for a human being to be alone, He does not provide Adam with what is often translated as a helper, but rather following the original Hebrew with a counterpart able to complement Adam. What is suggested in the text is that the new companion is to make up the deficits in the other. And such giftedness should not be reduced to the ability of giving birth. A better translation for the counterpart would therefore be rescuer, for the same Hebrew word is often used to describe God's very own saving activity. The fact that Adam had to be put to sleep in order to be rescued by his counterpart is rather telling. For the hardest part of our spiritual journey is actually to learn how to let go, how to get out of the way, so that God's Spirit and not our ego is able to be creative. The best and wisest we can do at times is to step aside. Adam's blissful sleep is indeed rich in associations. There are other creation myths outside of the ancient East that also emphasize the importance of sleep in the act of creation. In Hinduism, sleep plays an important part of the process of creation. The god Vishnu lies fast asleep in the midst of the primeval ocean, and from his navel grows a lotus flower, out of which the world emanates. These accounts all speak to the enormous potential hidden in what seems rather a passive state, and for some even a waste of precious time. Sleeping is a highly creative activity. It gifts us with a rescuer and a lotus flower. In Old Testament times, sleeping is also understood to be a privileged state for divine closeness. Abraham, for example, falls into deep sleep just before the extraordinary covenant with God. And young Samuel lies in the sanctuary of the temple Shiloh when he receives God's fourfold calling to his prophetic ministry. The story of Samuel's calling resonates with a ritual which was also practiced in other traditions. Already in other religions from the ancient East, we hear about the ritual of incubation, which derives from the Latin word incubare, to lie down. One would seek a sanctuary in order to lie down and, with the help of additional rites, ask for God's special care and attention. Such practices of incubation were widespread in classical antiquity and were in parts adapted by Christianity. There are over 200 known places where believers sought a state of sleep in order to receive healing from various illnesses. In most of these temples, Asclepius, the god of medicine, was venerated. But apart from such a positive interpretation of sleep as a state of creation and revelation, the Hebrew Bible also recognizes a negative dimension of sleep. Sleep becomes a metaphor for laziness and idleness. The book of Proverbs, for example, offers a biting criticism of the sluggard. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. This is an example of conventional wisdom and a well-meant advice. The problem is, of course, when such formulas and phrases become cold and hard. When conventional wisdom claims to know too much, it is in danger of blaming the poor for their poverty. Life is more complex, and what in some cases might be laziness, in other instances is a legacy of inequality and a lack of access to resources. In fact, sleep can become a momentary escape from misery and poverty. Carol Zamora's photograph casts new light on the idea of a rescuer and the gift of creative dreaming. The New Testament also has an ambivalent view of sleep. The example that stands out is the only scene where the Synoptic Gospels portray Jesus as sleeping. But we're not told if it was a slow wave or a rapid eye movement sleep. In other words, was he resting or dreaming? That day at evening, Jesus said to his followers, "Come with me across the lake." So they left the crowd behind and went with Jesus in the boat he was already in. There were also other boats that went with them. A very bad wind came up on the lake. The waves were coming over the sides and into the boat, and it was almost full of water. Jesus was inside the boat, sleeping with his head on a pillar. The followers went and woke him. They said, "Teacher, don't you care about us? We are going to drown." Jesus stood up and gave a command to the wind and the water. He said, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind stopped and the lake became calm. He said to his followers, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The story of Jesus and the disciples in the boat, surprised by a sudden storm on the Sea of Galilee, intends to be more than a reference to Jesus taking a nap. Jesus asleep in the midst of the chaos of a frightening storm is meant to encourage a deeper trust. The biblical scene evokes the forces of chaos that keep threatening life. What does it take to be able to sleep in the midst of chaos when things seem to fall apart? Are we witnessing the ignorance of a carpenter's son who does not know what dangers lurk being out at sea? Or is it a childlike innocence that knows that God does never sleep or slumber? The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard compares Jesus' trust to the deep sleep of an infant. In this way, the highest resembles the lowest. Only a child, especially a very little child, or an animal can lie very quietly and sleep in a storm. The rest of us cannot do this. There's some who might of course object. People who say they sleep like a baby usually don't have one. Ignorance or innocence, naivety or deep trust. Whatever it was, we notice that when Jesus is woken up, he emerges from his sleep with the power to calm the storm. I would love to know what he dreamt about. What are the dreams that instill such clarity of vision, such determination of heart and mind? His sleep was certainly full of promise. Jesus' rebuke of his disciples is both an invitation and a summoning to sleep and dream more boldly, especially when overwhelmed by forces beyond our control. Such sleeping and dreaming inspires the kind of faith that can move mountains and even dares to walk on water. But there are other stories where the Gospels portray sleep in a more negative way and emphasize the importance of vigilance. Such vigilance, though, is not so much about keeping danger at bay. It is a wakefulness not sourced in fear, but rather in the desire to be attentive to the divine, the God who can instill a deep inner peace despite overwhelming challenges. From the Sea of Galilee, therefore, we move to the Garden of Gethsemane. In what seems like a surprising reversal of roles, we see the disciples Peter, James, and John fast asleep, while Jesus wrestles in prayer. Was the disciples' sleep one of ignorance or innocence? 3 times Jesus admonishes them to stay awake, to watch and pray with him. It is one thing to be safe from the storm, it is another to know that one has to make it through the storm. Not to be able to sleep can therefore also be an invitation to seek a deeper communion with the one known to be love. Indeed, how to stay in the place of such love when facing those driven by hatred and violence. The Apostle Paul must have suffered a very similar agony. In his first letter to the congregation in Thessalonica, he inculcates the importance of such wakefulness and even evokes the imagery of warfare. You are all children of the light and children of the day. We do not belong to the night or to the darkness. So then let us not be like others who are asleep, but let us be awake and sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, putting on faith and love as breastplate, and the hope of salvation as a helmet. Such negative evaluation of sleep also influenced early Christian theologians. To them, sleep harbored the possibility of losing sight of divine grace. The early monastic movement therefore encouraged vigils and nocturnal prayers as an antidote to sleepiness. But in contrast to such negative view of sleep, there's also always been simultaneously a positive interpretation of sleep as a gift from God. In Islamic and Christian traditions, we find the medieval legend of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus and companions of the cave. During the time of persecution of Christians under the Roman Emperor Decius, 7 young men refused to recant their faith, resisting to bow to Roman idols. They find refuge and safety in a cave. When their persecutors discover their hiding place, they wall the entrance to the cave in order to starve them to death. But God saves the 7 men by putting them into a sleep of several hundred years. Only long after, once the persecution ended, they wake up again. In Islam, the 18th Surah, Al-Kahf, the cave, forms a standard part of the Friday prayers. Sleep becomes the medium of divine rescue and a sign of God's closeness. The ambivalent evaluation of sleep continues in religious and philosophical debates throughout the centuries. The mystics, for example, the Franciscan Cardinal Johannes Bonaventura, described the sleep of peace as an image of the highest form of human connectedness with God. The Enlightenment of the 18th century, on the other hand, secularizes sleep and focuses on medical possibilities to optimize sleep and avoid sleeplessness. The Romantic movement again offers a strong contrast by idealizing night, sleep, and dreams as entrance gates to a deeper reality of life. From the second half of the 19th century, then, symbolic aspects of sleep move into the background. With the age of industrialization and urbanization, the times of work and sleep are more and more structured. The first sleeping pills are developed and distributed. Karl Marx adds a political dimension to sleep. In his work Das Kapital, Marx points out that sleep marks a natural limit to the availability of human work power. In the light of such a diverse and ambiguous history of sleep, one wonders what one could recommend as a present-day view of sleep. Psalm 127 could form the basis for an ongoing conversation. Unless the Lord builds the The builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat. For while they sleep, He provides for. Good things come to those who wait. The psalmist would add, to those who wait and sleep. Does the psalm suggest that what matters ultimately are not fierce and tireless efforts, but God's blessing? In my mind, the psalmist does not encourage a naive and irresponsible trust that God will simply provide. Human efforts and dedication are not devalued, but we are once again reminded to find the right balance between work and rest, giving and receiving. There's only so much we can do within the hours of one day. To know when to hold on and when to let go remains a lifelong challenge. To be wise is not to reduce our sleep to only a few hours, but to welcome sleep as a divine gift and privilege. And by now, science has also taught us that such blissful sleep itself is a highly creative and regenerative activity, but without our conscious doing and striving. God does indeed provide even in our sleep, and the mystery of such sleep is not diminished, but rather deepened by what neuroscientists have discovered. The theologian Volker Stürmke therefore describes sleep as a natural sacrament. Sleep is an aspect of our reality that can become a sign for another divine reality. What is important is to understand and shape sleep accordingly. Sleep becomes a natural sacrament, inviting us into a deeper communion with the source of all life and love. We are reminded to cherish the synergy of life as a divine gift and a human calling. What applies to sleep is true for all aspects of human life. Whenever our doing becomes something absolute and neglects the fundamental giftedness of life, then we are prone to lose our balance and cause harm not just to others, but also to ourselves. So, should one take a sleeping tablet to assist God in providing for us? It can be a saving grace for some, but its addictive quality reminds us that medicating ourselves cannot be a permanent solution. The natural sacrament of sleep cannot really be grasped, at least not for the moment. It remains a life-giving gift. Who knows where we will find ourselves tonight? Will it be the Garden of Eden or the Garden of Gethsemane? Or will it be out at sea? Wherever it will be, God bless you to place your soul and your body in God's safe refuge this night. God keep you this night and always. Amen.
Who made the mountain? Who made the tree? Who made the river flow to the sea? And who in the starry sky? Somebody bigger than you and I. Who made the flowers bloom in the spring? Who writes the song for the robin to sing? And who sends the rain when the earth is dry? Somebody bigger than you and I. He lights the way when the road is long, keeps you company. To go on from bigger